800, 24, 210. Don't worry, that has nothing to do with the vital statistics of the racing driver Christina Sora. 800 drivers took part in the 24-hour race in 210 teams. And our presenter was one of them, in what is surely the toughest race of the year.
Hello to all Nordschleife fans. Welcome to our review of the 24-hour race on the Nürburgring.
This year, the 24-hour race on the Nürburgring took place very early in the year at the beginning of May. But despite the cold and wet weather, around 180,000 fans again found their way to the world's longest circuit. The fans didn't let the weather conditions spoil their good mood, for the race on the Nordschleife is a compulsory highlight in the motorsport calendar. Past years have demonstrated the all-around success of the event, even in bad weather conditions. The event started on Thursday with the 4th Adenauer Racing Day. 2 days before the start of the race, the motto was decibels instead of horsepower. For fans and drivers, this meant a huge party on and around the disco truck. The spectators don't often get to see their heroes of the Nordschleife this close up. It was a very special event, even for the older, or should we say, more experienced drivers.
I think it's great the way that the fans are part of the action here at the Nürburgring, and that shows what a hands-on sport touring car racing is. The people get to see the drivers and can talk to them, things that are missing a little in Formula 1 racing where the drivers are more distant. Here we're there, the people are there. It's great how everyone gets into the mood for the race.
No less than 14,000 people flocked to the small Eifel town on the Nordschleife. Adenau usually only has a population of around 3,000. However, everything went smoothly despite the stampede of visitors, thanks to the careful planning.
The organization of Adenauer Racing Day takes around 6 months, getting a diversion set up, ensuring that all cars leave the venue and finally ensuring smooth organization.
Of course, attention centered on the four-wheeled stars of the show, the race cars and the official cars. 26 extremely powerful Audis were once again provided this year. Meanwhile, the celebrities enjoyed the attention. German rapper Smudo was one of the drivers, as always completely relaxed.
It looks stressful, but for me coming to the Eifel is a bit like going on holiday. I'm really looking forward to the 24-hour race, and all this gets us into the mood.
The racing driver and singer of the band Fantastische Vier then personally contributed to getting the audience into the right mood. As a DJ at the mixing tables, the fans loved it. But by Adenauer Racing Day, at the latest holidaymaker's Smudo's mind was only on the race. There's a reason for the fascination with the green hell of the Nordschleife. It's a kind of love-hate relationship. I can still remember my first lap, and I remember thinking of the impossibility of holding races here, but you're drawn back again and again. The heavens opened right on time for the opening lap of the Eifel Motorsport Marathon on Saturday. However, this didn't stop the fans on the circuit from giving the drivers a warm welcome. Rubbing shoulders with the favorites in the opening lap, this can only happen here at the Nürburgring. This year there was a battle of the concepts between the favorites. The two works BMW, the Manthey Porsche, the Jarzen Porsche and the Zackspeed Viper had the greatest chances of winning. With about 6.2 liters, the Viper had the highest engine capacity of all vehicles in the field. From 0 to 100 kilometers in 3 seconds. Top speed 285 kilometers per hour. However, the Zackspeed team had to come up with clever ideas this year, as the rules called for modifications to be made to the car.
We reduced the engine capacity from 8 to 6.2 liters by immobilizing 2 cylinders, and we used the same engine head and block. We are now driving with 6.2 liters, but since we are now complying with the rules regarding engine capacity, we are allowed to leave out the air restrictor. This means that we have a bit more air and can compensate everything somewhat.
However, fewer refueling stops were to be an advantage for the works BMW with their capacity of just 4 liters. Just like the 3.8-liter Manthey Porsche, the team was counting on saving a full 6 minutes for refueling stops alone over the entire 24 hours. But this wasn't their only advantage.
The lower engine capacity allows us to be lighter. 2 years ago we drove a turbo, but then you have to be 100 kilos heavier than with a naturally aspirated engine. This means that we have lower fuel consumption and can drive longer stints than the Alsen Porsche, for example.
It goes without saying that all the top favorites had vehicles with high torque. However, the Alsen brothers 996 Turbo and the Zack-Speed Viper had the highest torque. This enabled them to make best use of the horsepower under their bonnets on the circuit, which stood them in particularly good stead when overtaking and on uphill sections. Furthermore, the Alsen Porsche was the only one of the favorites to have four-wheel drive. It would thus have an advantage in the event of the notoriously changeable weather conditions in the Eifel. So why didn't all participants choose vehicles with four-wheel drive? There's a simple reason for that. According to the rules, four-wheel drive is only permitted in cars that are available with four-wheel drive as production vehicles too. However, this didn't intimidate the BMW rivals.
Four-wheel drive is usually unbeatable in such conditions. Distributing the power over 4 wheels is better for tire wear and fuel consumption. However, we know that the car is relatively susceptible. We hope it stays the course. I'd be pleased for Uwe and Jürgen Alsen, they deserve a victory, but we plan on making life very tough for them.
The field then prepared for the start behind the Audi RS4 as the leading vehicle. In first place, Uwe Alsen, who had the fastest training time. Behind him the Manthey Porsche, followed by the two works BMW and the Viper. However, the heavy rain before the race necessitated a second opening lap. Several well-known faces were spied at the edge of the track.
The race, I think it's a great show. It's the first time I see a 24-hour race, and a lot of people is here, and it's really a great show. And yeah, I'm interested to be here to watch.
At the start, Bruno Spengler, who drives a Mercedes in the DTM, watched Uwe Alsen on the far right fall back. Duncan Huisman in the Schnitzer BMW with the starting number 2 to the far left in the picture surges ahead. Behind him, Peter Zakowski in the Viper and Jörg Müller, the defending champion, in the BMW with the other drivers Hans-Joachim Stuck and Dirk Müller. Following the start, the field headed towards the revived Castrol S, because the usual routing of the track through the Mercedes arena had been turned into part of drivers' paddock. Whilst the first cars passed through the bottleneck with ease, things got very tight behind them. Unimpressed by all this, Zakowski saw his chance and passed by Huisman. But back to the starting accident. Neither Markus Grossman in the second Viper nor Roland Asch in the Nissan are prepared to budge an inch, with the result that both cars spin and the Viper touches Mamoru's Porsche. Whilst the causes of the crash got off scot-free, Peter Mamoru had to head directly to the pit.
The Zack-Speed Viper was on the left. It spun and hit me on the front left-hand side. That damaged my radiator and meant the end of the race for me. What I can't understand is why they wanted to take the first bend of the first lap with 4 cars at once.
Uwe Alsen was also angry that he was forced to head for the pit. He had driven only the Grand Prix course because something was wrong. It took more than 2 hours to analyze and fix the problem. The turbocharger had overheated and had to be replaced.
It would have all gone according to plan if it hadn't been for the second opening lap. But everything flooded. There was so much water in the intake manifold and the cooling ducts that everything packed up. It took us quite a long time to find the problem and dry everything out, and only then could we continue.
To start with, Peter Zakowski and the Viper took the lead in front of the two BMW driven by Duncan Huisman and Dirk Müller. Yet at the lowest point of the track, Breitscheid, Zakowski lost grip for a moment, spun and dropped back. Two BMW 320i models from Schubert Motors led the second of three starting groups. Although these two cars were among the best 25 in the training, they started 2 minutes behind from position 75 and 76. As the rules only believed them capable of victory in their class, they had to start in a group together with the rivals in their class. The two BMWs in front had put a little distance between themselves and the rest of the field. Lukas Luhr followed at a respectful distance in the Manthey Porsche, and behind him Nordschleife specialist Dirk Adolf in a V8 Star Jaguar and Peter Zakowski. Huge demands are made on the drivers. A driver like Hans-Joachim loses up to 4 kilos in weight during a race. Around 50% of the course can be taken at full throttle, with up to 100 gear changes per lap, depending on the traffic situation. Roland Asch survived his spin at the start and now tried to catch up with the leaders. The four-wheel drive of the Nissan Skyline GTR was surely an advantage on the track that was slowly starting to dry off. After almost an hour, Duncan Huisman was driving slowly. The BMW M3 GTR had touched a Honda Integra when lapping it, damaging the rear right-hand tire. The Honda driver obviously hadn't seen Huisman. The drivers of small cars usually indicate and move over as soon as they see a faster car appear in their rearview mirror. But the communication clearly didn't work here. It took half an hour to repair the damage.
I was much faster. I was in the process of overtaking him, and then I braked for the right-hand bend. I think his front wheels probably locked, which meant that he didn't slow down and hit my rear wheel. I spun and the rim was damaged.
The BMW with the number 1 now led in front of the Manthey Porsche. In the meantime, both the drivers and the tires had been changed, and the top teams were now on slicks. As well as the drivers Lohr, Bernard and Thiemann, a Frenchman called Emmanuel Collard was part of the Manthey foursome. A total of 24 countries participated in the 24-hour race. 600 drivers came from Germany alone. One of them is the Nordschleife expert Arthur Deutgen. He drove 12 laps on rain tires. The reward, 4th place for a while.
The track was still wet in parts, with rivulets running across, making it very difficult to drive. I treated my tires gently right from the start and planned my strategy. That's paid off now, and I've gone from 15 to 4. I'm very satisfied, the car's doing fantastically.
Returning to the track after a good 3-minute stop with the former DTM driver Dieter Quester. The Zaxby team now try to catch up with the leaders. Gradually they move up to position 3. By contrast, Dirk Adolf's V8 Star team had bad luck. Engine problems forced them to retire early from the race. Others had more luck, or at least they had skid off the track on the Grand Prix course. On the Nordschleife, this error would have had more serious consequences. After almost 2 hours repair time, the Alzen Porsche re-entered the race 9 laps behind the leaders. The only positive aspect, the ranking from position 216 could only improve. By contrast, the Manthey Porsche didn't experience any problems. The changing weather conditions were all the team had to battle with.
Now we've simply decided to come in and to send Timo out with slicks. You simply lose too much with rain tires because the tires overheat too much. You look for the puddles start disappearing and then you lose too much time.
The cars from the alternative fuel class weren't involved in the battle for overall victory. The VW New Beetle, driven by Smudo, Tom von Löwis, Rudi Seyer and Thorsten Stadler, was in 100th place after 2.5 hours of driving time. 2004 is a year that will not be forgotten by rapper Smudo and his team. After 23 hours almost being out and then being rescued by a pit neighbor, the Beetle driver had just one wish for this year.
Next year, I want to pass the finish line in a conventional manner. 3rd place, 2nd place, or maybe 1st in our class. That would be nice, that would be enough.
He still had a night and a day to keep this resolution. However, time was also against the defending champion. The BMW with the number 1 was pushed to the pit for repairs. A defect to the wheel suspension had to be repaired, which took more than 10 minutes and thus cost the lead. Müller was a victim of the notorious Nürburgring weather, where it rained on one section of the circuit, whilst remaining dry everywhere else.
It started raining relatively early in the Hudson-Bach area. I couldn't go back to the pit, which meant that I had to drive the full lap. It was a real downpour with huge hailstones, and at some time I found myself leading the pack. I think I had 8 or 9 cars behind me. In the Bergwerk area, water covered the track. It was like sailing a boat rather than driving. I was the first to lightly bump the safety barrier, but I was able to drive on. Chaos ensued behind me, and everyone else ran off the track. I then drove to the pit, where the boys had to replace the left wheel suspension, and that took quite a long time.
The Zackspeed Viper now took the lead for the first time. The tough reptile had handled the accident in Breitscheid well. A secret favorite, the Porsche RSR from Land Motorsport, had worked its way up to position 10 again following the repair of a broken wishbone. The Manthey Porsche, on the other hand, battled against the Zackspeed Viper, with sometimes one ahead and sometimes the other after every pit stop. After around 3 hours of driving time, the Viper lapped the Falcon Nissan, now driven by Takayuki Kinoshita. At 1,350 kg, both cars had a similar weight, and with more than 500 horsepower, they had a similar engine power too. The ease with which Sascha Belt overtook and then sped away was amazing. Although Johannes Scheidt had had to return to the pit with an engine problem following the first opening lap, his blue BMW M3 GT-RS was now among the top 20 again. Here he passed one of the 2 Kissling Opel Astra coupes, which were battling against the Schubert BMWs in the 2-liter class. The yellow Schubert BMWs seemed to be out of the reach of the other vehicles in their class. With lap times of around 9 minutes 50, they were only 40 seconds slower than the top vehicles, despite their relatively low power of only 300 bhp. The 2 Schubert BMWs were also among the top 15 in the overall ranking. The Eifel now also showed itself from its best side, even though it took a while for the circuit to dry off a little. However, the improvement to the weather came too late for the Irmsches team's V8 Star Opel. The reason for this was an accident in the airfield area. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the helicopter offered a pleasant view of the world. After 4 of 24 hours, the Zackspeed Viper had completed 20 laps and was just in front of the Manthey Porsche, the only car in the top 15 to have already made 3 pit stops. All in all, the field was still close together. The first 12 cars were separated by just 1 lap. The BMW with starting number 1, now driven by Müller, continued to make up ground. A good lap separated it from the Viper and Manthey Porsche. The Suzuki Swift GTR, driven by Christian and Sebastian Cionier, Guido Janssen and Sven Müller, ran off the track in the NGK chicane. However, let this much be said, the little Japanese car came first in its class of engine capacity of up to 1.4 liters. The Viper was still untroubled by problems. Although it left the pit behind the BMW with starting number 2, it was almost 2 laps ahead in the race.
We are following our own rhythm successfully so far. Actually, everything is going as planned. You just need a bit of luck with regard to when which tires need changing. I'm curious to see how things will continue.
Now there was a direct duel between the Viper and the BMW. Despite being almost 2 laps behind, the test of strength was a pleasure to watch. The Marlboro Porsche was forced to retire for good, even before darkness fell. The rear right-hand wheel carrier was irreparably damaged. Wolfgang Kaufmann had collided with another vehicle. The Falken Motorsports team followed the race very closely. For some of the time, the choice of tyre was too conservative, which led to the car dropping out of the top 5. However, driving in the evening sun was still a pleasure. Those who claim that a Volvo isn't a sporty means of transport should take a closer look at how this Volvo S60 with the starting number 95 drifts. The economical BMW M3 with the number 68 from Dalle Motorsport was still doing well. At times, a comparatively light vehicle made it to position 3. It was only inferior to the top vehicles on the high-speed sections of the circuit. Christina Sura made good progress with her teammates Demian Schaffert and Elmer Jorick and team boss Traudel Klink, whilst the fans along the circuit started to prepare for the evening.
Also ohne die Fans an der Strecke wären wir gar nichts wert. Die sind bei jedem Wetter sind hier. Meistens war es nicht so schön. Bei Regen, bei Sumpf, die bauen ihre Hütten auf, die feiern damit und die sind richtig mit Herzblut dabei. Und das sind schlussendlich auch die, die am Start und im Ziel Gänsehaut verursachen. Also schon toll.
Meanwhile, 4 Italians and their French vehicle were having problems on the historic German racetrack. The Clio looked a little bent. In the evening, there was a duel between the Falken Nissan with the number 44 and the Scheit BMW with the number 10. The Japanese car was the winner of this duel. Then, a further meeting of the BMW with the number 2 and the Zack-Speed Viper. The BMW stayed at front this time, but the Viper was still 2 laps ahead. Meanwhile, events were taking an unforeseen turn on the Nordschleife. Shortly after the jump in the airfield area, the Honda Civic Type R with the number 226 crashed into the barrier. The Viper was experiencing comparatively minor problems. The fuel tank reserve didn't play along when the team attempted to drive 9 laps instead of 8, and the Viper had to be pushed into the pit.
That was planned. We came in and our tank reserve system was misbehaving a little. That's why we had some ignition faults, but we've just fixed that problem.
The time lost enabled the Manthey team to take the lead once and for all. This situation shows what can happen when you overtake but the car in front of you doesn't see you. The Kissling Opel 143 with a Finnish German driver team and the Audi TT with the number 106 were lucky that things didn't turn out worse. Sparks flew among the fans too, both on the barbecue and in the skies above. Of course, this didn't escape the drivers' attention either.
I did this race last year and you can see them from the track and you can smell the burgers cooking on the barbecues and stuff, so it's a great experience. It's just a pity the weather's a little bit wet, but that's what happens when you race in May, I guess.
Darkness fell. The BMW with number 1 was still in third place and now started pursuit of the leaders. The blue flashing lights in the cars were particularly conspicuous in the dark. However, use of these light signals was reserved for the 20 fastest cars in the time training, like the Manthey Porsche here. In addition to Manthey's 911 GT3, a further 20 Porsches participated in the 2005 24-hour race. It's almost a tradition that BMW is the most frequent of the cars mentioned. 63 cars made by the Munich manufacturer entered the race. The interim results after 8 hours listed a variety of cars, 4 different makes in the top 5 places and an assortment in the field behind. It was remarkable that despite 8 pit stops, the Porsche with the number 40 was only 3 laps behind in position 11. The drivers now had to be particularly attentive. The Nordschleife can be tricky at night. Now above all, the more experienced drivers were sent out and the older drivers who don't need as much sleep. Pit stop for the Manthey Porsche. Lucas Loh took over the wheel from Marcel Thiemann, who was the first to drive in the dark.
It's dry on the Nordschleife, but it's still a bit wet here on the Grand Prix track. A bit damp rather than really wet, but you still have to be careful. But otherwise you can still drive on slicks. You can see all the points where something happened on the Nordschleife. There are sand everywhere and accident sites. So you really have to be a bit careful and make sure that you stay on the ideal line, because it's still a bit damp next to the track.
This is the most fascinating, challenging and impressive overtime in the world. Overtime where the focus is on staying awake and fit. And the Red Viper Snake Charmers were skilled in this. Perfect teamwork, smooth pit stops and a good overview of the track rewarded them with a constant third place during the night. But as morning approached, the Viper lost more and more places. The reason for this was a long pit stop necessitating lots of replacements. Whilst the fans of the two works BMW bravely endured the bitter cold of the Nordschleife to support their teams, the drivers and those responsible for the starting numbers 1 and 2 did their best not to disappoint their supporters. But despite their experience, the team and other participants had to cope with a few changes in the 33rd 24-hour race.
First of all, the routing of the track means that the individual driving stints are longer in terms of kilometers. Of course, that means that more petrol is needed. And as a result of this, each driver can only drive for 10 laps when the conditions are perfect.
Nur unter ganz idealen Umständen 10 Runden lang durchführen können.
One team stole the show from both BMW and Zackspeed in the hours of darkness. Olaf Monter and his team refused to budge from first place, despite the cold and problems with trailing throttle fuel cutoff, which led to increased fuel consumption. Or at least not until the morning. But despite the will to stay the pace, tiredness catches up with almost everyone sooner or later. Only the team bosses remained resolute.
We'll sleep when it is finished. Our young mechanics spend the nights at the disco so they can work through nights here too. I don't need a break.
However, if anyone had been at risk of falling asleep, the lit fire in the pit lane certainly woke them up again. The victim, who else could it have been, was the Alsen brothers Porsche. Their run of bad luck was continuing. Shortly afterwards, the works BMW with the number 1 came a cropper, and the hopes of an overall win were dashed. For a long time, the top favorite, the BMW, was suddenly forced to take a break. A very long break.
We are having problems with the clutch. It needs to be replaced. It slipped, and now we need to find out what's wrong. We'll replace it, and then we'll go out again.
The Viper 2 later returned to the race, but for the time being, the Zackspeed team had lost their hopes of a place on the podium. For the more than 100,000 fans who spent the night around the Nordschleife, Motorsport increasingly took a backseat. The fans showed what they were made of in terms of beer consumption or other artistic abilities. The results of this activity could soon be seen. The fans certainly knew how to party, and some of them demonstrated resourcefulness. Sometimes a stake acted as an incentive, also for creative high performance. Everyone brought their dearest with them, and not necessarily a woman, and everyone did what they liked best. Somehow this always seemed to involve cars. Just before 6 in the morning, the campsites fell silent, but the drivers on the racetrack still had 9 hours ahead of them. A few fans were still awake, but most of them had lost the battle with sleep. Only the really hard guys held out at the edge of the track. The BMW with the number 2 was still a lap behind in second place. But experience has shown that most things happen in the early hours of the morning. At 6:10, the engine of the leading Manthey Porsche gave up. Timo Bernhard had wanted to change down in the mine area but got stuck between 2 gears. When he then tried to shift down again with a sequential transmission, the engine gave up, stopped completely in the end. As well as the BMW number 2, which now assumed the lead, the Falcon team especially benefited from this. The Nissan Skyline now ranked second with a lag of 4 laps. The interim result after 16 hours saw the Porsche with a starting number 46 in second place, but it was clear that further laps would not be added to the 89 completed laps in the near future. The Schaut BMW had forged ahead during the night and was now in position 4 behind the BMW defending champion. As well as team boss Johannes Schaut, Oliver Kainz, Dennis Rostig and Tobias Hagenmeier took turns behind the wheel. The Viper with the drivers Zakowski, Lechner and Bird was in position 7, 1 lap behind the BMW in position 3 and 3 laps behind the Falcon team in position 2. This Suzuki Ignis Sport was a right-hand drive model. That was nothing special for its 3 Japanese drivers, although it was an unusual situation for the German rally driver Niki Schelle. In the end, the foursome won the A2 class. Things were now also going really well for Müller and Stuck's BMW. Following the problems of the night, Jörg Müller twice drove the fastest lap, so did Dirk Müller. In the end, he drove a lap time of 8 minutes 47.602, the fastest time of the whole race. Others had problems in the early hours of the morning. Car after car skidded or was involved in an accident. Although the drivers had relieved each other during the night, they were still overtired. Only 5 teams kept to the minimum conditions and registered just 2 drivers. The other teams had 3 or 4 drivers per car. A small Opel bravely held its own throughout the night. In addition to Karl Mauer, Frank Klaas and Steffen Schulz, this Astra was also driven by Opel board member Hans Demand. Then a shock for the Japanese Falcon team. From position 2, the race came to an abrupt end for them at 7:20. A bitter final appearance for the Nissan Skyline. The team had hoped for a place on the podium, but the engineering didn't play along. Through no fault of his own, driver Dirk Huisman hit the crash barrier.
While I went out, it was my first lap, and somewhere Metzgesfeld I applied a brake and something broke in the suspension, so the car turned to the right instead of to the left, into the left-hand corner. And there's nothing I could do, so the car just hit the Armco at fairly high speed. So the damage is so that we cannot continue the race.
This wasn't the only car forced to give up. The Schaut BMW retired from the race with engine failure at 7:25 a.m. The wheel suspension of the Land Porsche was damaged again. This also meant a premature end to the race. Here, 2 competitors demonstrated what an overtaking maneuver shouldn't sound like. Both cars were lucky to be able to continue the race. By contrast, everything was going according to plan for the leading BMW. A comfortable lead of 6 laps allowed the team to make a stop to change the tires to intermediates in view of the changeable weather conditions. At around 7:50 a.m., Lukas Luhr re-entered the race in the Manthey Porsche. However, the team was now only 12th, chances of winning down the drain. The Morgan Plus A team hadn't expected to win anyway. However, the British-made car was certainly a feast for the eyes. It kept raining on certain sections of the track, or oil was lost, neither of which made the race any easier. The Manthey Porsche had only been back on the track for 2 laps when bad luck struck again. The wheel suspension had broken, the team yet again lost a lot of time. By contrast, the biodiesel-driven VW Nubite was running like clockwork. At the end, the team ranked 45th overall and 5th in the class of vehicles with alternative fuels. Best in this category was the Alpha 147 ITD with the number 249 driven by FIA GT drivers Timo Scheider and Michael Bartels, among others. The series of retirements put a place on the podium within reach of other vehicles. For example, the Audi RS4 driven by Uwe Black, which had now moved up to position 5.
We've been able to put a bit of a distance between us and those behind us. We were in 4th place, but then we had a small technical defect which cost us 10 minutes.
This Audi 200 Quattro with the starting number 60 was the most senior vehicle in the field. No other car had notched up more experience on the Nürburgring. Position 6 was held by the Porsche 911 GT3 with the starting number 32. It was driven by Dr. Edgar Althoff and Paul Holverscheid, among others. Both drivers won a place on the podium in 2002. Position 7, the Porsche GT3 Cup, also piloted by experienced Nordschleife drivers such as Heinz-Josef Böhmes or Dieter Schonstein. The drivers of the sister vehicle to the Porsche with the number 41, namely the other Müller Porsche GT3 Cup with the number 42, included the daughter of Jackie X, Vanina X, and she did pretty well too.
I didn't expect much. I expected to have a lot of work in the car because I was told the Nürburgring and the Nordschleife was very, very difficult, and with the weather, the conditions were so extreme that I was really wondering where I was going. Now I cannot believe that we are in the top 10.
In the top 10 and with an eye on the front places. After 20 hours, the Belgian was in 7th place. Untouchable at the front, the BMW with Lamy, Side, Huisman and Priaulx. There was still 2 laps between the BMW with number 1 in 2nd place and the Zackspeed Viper in 3rd place. Nevertheless, the two enjoyed a little duel on the track. The Renault Clio RS with the number 144 was driven by Robert Huisman, Patrick Hinter, Marc-Uwe von Niesewand-Reich and also his father Uwe Reich. And this certainly wasn't Uwe Reich's first time on the Nordschleife.
You know, if you've driven all 32 24-hour races, of course, you've got to drive the 33rd one too. I'm kind of addicted to it, but as long as God continues to bless me with good health and the sponsors continue to pay a little, we're going to continue.
At the end, the team achieved a respectable 48th position in the overall ranking. The Manthey Porsche got into a risky situation once again whilst overtaking. But this time it was lucky, although the annoyance in the cockpit was understandable.
We've caught up a fair bit and we're now in the top 10. I think we ranked 9th overall. That's damage limitation. It's a shame we weren't able to win the race. We were leading for a long time. I'd say we dominated and were in control of the race for a long time. It's a pity, but I think we'll give it another go next year.
In the end, the Porsche 911 GT3 with Dr. Edgar Althoff, Paul Holverscheid, Norbert Fischer and Stefan Beil came in 4th. Fifth place went to Heinz-Josef Böhmes, Thomas Cole, Dieter Schonstein and Andreas Bovensiepen in the Porsche GT3 Cup with the number 41. In the A6 class for vehicles with capacity of between 3 and 3.5 liters, more than half of the 18 teams didn't cross the finishing line. The fastest car in this class was a Honda NSX, driven by Stefan Slesak, Klaus Nietzwitz and Werner Carter. The team came 12th in the overall ranking. Opel sports boss Volker Stritzig ended the 24-hour race less successfully. His Opel Astra Coupe came 39th in the overall ranking and 6th in his class. After winning the race in 2003, the course was taken in a more leisurely manner this time.
Of course, in the past I always looked ahead, but it's still just as much fun. You fight with a car like this just as you do with the big ones, and above all we have the experience of both sides. That is, you know what it's like to be among the fastest, and now what it's like to be one of the smaller ones, and that's a great help during the race.
The winners of the 2-liter specials class were Claudia Hürtgen, Mark Hennerizzi, Ralf Bonhost and Thorsten Schubert. And they even made 11th place in the overall ranking. An incredible performance.
First of all, it's a great feeling to take part in the race. And it's an even better feeling when you're first in class with 45 participants. But I don't want to count our chickens before they hatch. We still have an hour to go and we've seen a lot of 24-hour race from up here. However, it's been a very good race so far.
And in the end, this was indeed sufficient. The energy BMW with the number 202 also won its class, and not even an error at the end of the start-finish straight could change this. This Mazda RX-8 was driven only by women, all with a great deal of motorsport experience. Stephanie Harm, Katharina Felser, Nicole Lüttike and Kati Droste came in 55th in the end. This Toyota Lexus with hybrid drive was a further special vehicle. The drivers included Marc Duess, a 3-time winner of the 24-hour race. The best Group N car came 19th in the overall ranking. This was the Fleper Motorsports team Honda Civic, driven by Harald Tönnes, Norbert Bermes and Marcel Engels. The Artsen Troop finally reached the finish line too. Having entered the race 2 hours late, they managed to achieve a respectable 10th place in the end.
We'd actually said that we were going to pack up, but everyone said let's keep going. We haven't quite finished the race, there are still a few minutes to go.
And in these last few minutes, the weather in the Eifel showed its bad side again. However, the Viper rode out these conditions. On Sunday, just before 3, the leading BMW gathered its rivals around it. All those who had made it this far were applauded by the fans in the last lap. Those who encountered problems at this stage were usually given a helping hand to the finish line. And then the moment came. There was lots of cheering as the winner passed the finish line. Boris Said had the honor of driving the winning car over the finish line. His teammates Pedro Lamy, Duncan Huisman and Andy Priaulx could hardly believe it.
About 5 minutes ago when we crossed the line. Can't take anything for granted around here. One thing I've learned with this place is everything is just thrown at you and you just don't know what to expect. Expect the unexpected, for sure.
Last year, the winning trio Hans-Joachim Stuck, Dirk Müller and Jörg Müller managed 143 laps. This year, the winning team completed 139 laps after 24 hours. In addition to second place, the BMW with the number 1 also had the distinction of the fastest lap. Incidentally, in the end, Christina Sora and her co-drivers came 64th in the overall ranking. Happy winners! Lamy won the 24-hour race already a few times. However, Boris Seid, Duncan Huisman and Andy Priaulx entered their names in the list of winners for the first time. This was the last race for the BMW M3 GTR. The car's new home will be in a museum. That's all from the 24-hour race here at the Nürburgring. We'll see you again next year, and then hopefully the champagne shower will be all that makes us wet.
Die ganze Welt war